Section 7 of Dog Heroes of Many Lands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Dog Heroes of Many Lands by Sarah Noble Ives. Bum, a Brooklyn Dog. Got any references? No. I look like having references? Not any to speak of, I'll admit. The owner of the Bergen Street stables looked over the derelict specimen of humanity with amused contempt. The long, lanky form had the air of not having been well constructed in the first place. A suit of clothes, once dark blue, now faded to an indescribable greenish brown, ill covered him, so shrunken was the poor shoddy of its material. Frayed edges and unmended holes betokened the lack of personal care, and the lack of any one to care for him. The coat collar, turned up and buttoned to the throat, hid what the worn sleeves betrayed by their skimped length, that there was need of the garment to which one attaches collars and cuffs. Dried mud caked his boots between the holes and decked the man's trousers, thinning out to splashes on the coat tails. He was hollow-cheeked and hollow-eyed. His whole being was a threnody of hard luck. It was almost a sacrilege to call him a man, but God made him, so he passed for one. "Where did you work last?" "On the Pennsylvania road." President, I suppose, or maybe only a conductor in a palace car." "Quit your kiddin'. I was digging on the road bed with the Dagos." "And you got fired." "What if I did? You get fired for nothing nowadays." "I wasn't a union man, and they found I had another man's ticket." Yes, I know. There isn't much humanity in any kind of corporation nowadays. That's nothing, being fired. Anybody's liable to lose his place. But there's something else. Done time, haven't you?" "What business is that of yours?" The young man gave the elder a sharp sidelong glance. "Oh, nothing. I should say it was about 2 years ago, judging from the condition of your clothes. That's the regular cut they give them when they let them out. I've seen others. And you haven't got all of the lock-step out of your system yet. I saw you as you turned in. Quite a Sherlock Holmes I am. Now see here, I'd rather like to know what you did. It wasn't murder, or you wouldn't be out with that suit on. But while there are some things a man can live down, there are others that if he does once, he does again, and worse. What was it you went up for?" "Burglary, if you gotta know. When a feller's hard up and he can't find nothing to do, he's got to do what he can. I suppose it's no use now to ask you for a job." The man coughed and turned away. The stable owner rubbed his hand carefully over his beard, terminating with a roll of the fingers toward the tip. "How old are you?" 23. Well, maybe it isn't in the grain yet. A man that steals for a business is hard to cure, but if it's a case of being hard up, maybe there's a chance. Now see here, boy." Mr. Devon straightened up and looked directly into the young fellow's eyes. "It's plain to see that you haven't had much of the upper crust or the filling. Maybe it's your own fault, and maybe it isn't. But you're young, and perhaps if you can get off your uppers, you'll make good yet. I'm going to give you a chance. Not a big one, but a chance. If you can dig on a railroad bed, you can clean out stables. I need a stable boy. But mind you, no drink and no smoking. Cut those out. I can't have my horses neglected or my stables set on fire. As for stealing, try the straight thing and see how it works. What's your name?" "Gallagher. Thomas Gallagher." "Say, Mr. Devon, you're white, you are, and you won't be sorry." "Forget it," said Devon. "Here's a quarter. Run and get yourself a cup of coffee and a sandwich before you begin. Got a place to stay?" "No." "Well, sleep in the stables if you like. I have to keep someone here, and the other men all have families. Wait, got any money?" "Just this here quarter." "Well, I'll give you part of your week's wages in advance to tide you over. Curran here will show you what to do." Gruff, generous Mr. Devon turned back to his book balancing in the little coop of an office, and Gallagher, with a tear trembling on his eyelid, he was not too far from boyhood as to be above human emotion, went about his new duties. "He trusted me. I'll show him." And Gallagher did show him. Never had Mark Devon so little cause for complaint in his under-stable hand. He cleaned the stalls, he fetched and carried, and even when the other men imposed on him, he did not resent it. "I'll make good," he said. November was passing by, and Thanksgiving was near. Already Gallagher had made a rough attempt at mending up the old suit for work. With his scanty savings he had acquired a sweater and a decent pair of trousers, and aspired, with his next week's surplus, to a shirt. He was planning even still further grandeur. "By New Year's I guess I'll be able to get me a good warm coat. This sweater'll have to do till then. Lucky I don't have to pay room rent." He glanced down the street after Curran, who had just driven out with a dray. "Looks like snow in them clouds. Oh, well, snow's nothing when you've got a job and a place to sleep. Kinder cozy in this here stable, too." Snow it did. The great storm of November 25 is not yet forgotten. A real blizzard it was, with howling wind, snow flying, drifts piling, traffic stopped. The next morning Devon could not get over from his home on Myrtle Avenue. One of the stablemen who lived near, Curran it was, floundered in, breathless and spent with his struggle. "Some storm," he said to Gallagher. "You're lucky to be here without coming." He removed his coat and cap and shook off the snow that hung, wet and thick, to the rough wool. "There won't be any business this day. Devon'll play a losing game. No team could haul anything half a block. What, you going out? You're a fool to try." "Got to get my breakfast, now you're here," said Gallagher. "Shoo! I'd give you part of my lunch if I had enough to last. You'll have to get something, I suppose, and enough to last all day, so you won't have to go out again. There isn't a restaurant open, though. You'll have to go about 3 blocks. There's a little soup factory over on Atlantic Avenue that'll be boiling the pot, I guess. The folks live there. That's the only place you can be sure of." Gallagher buttoned up his sweater to the last notch and swung out, letting the wind help him. He covered the 3 blocks despite the difficulties of travel. With a hot breakfast to hearten him, he started back, but found that making progress against the gale was quite another thing. Pulling down his cap to cover his ears, and with his bundle of lunch under his arm, he started. But even while he had been sitting in the little eating-house, new drifts had whirled in on the side-street eddies, and the way he had come was choked and impassable. "I'll try it on the next cross-street," he said to himself. "There's a warehouse there with a covered walk." Battling, pushing, stumbling, falling, rising again, and struggling on, he fought his way along. Just 1 more block and he would be back in the stables. Heavens, what a blast that was! Gallagher was turning the corner that led back to Bergen Street when the wind, rushing down between the buildings, caught him, knocked the breath out of him, and plastered him flat against a brick wall. "Jiminy! Just saved my cap that time. This beats anything." He pried himself loose from the wall, only to be hurled into a snowbank. Blinded, dizzy, and breathing in dry gasps, he righted himself. "What's that?" Out of the other side of the drift came a wail, a pitiful, sobbing whimper. "Some poor cur lost in it," said Gallagher. "Well, I got to save myself." Again the cry, heartbreaking and almost human, in its pathos. "That's trouble, no mistake. Guess I'll have to turn life-saver. Hi there! Coming if I can get to you!" For an answer, a yelp, faint but imploring. "Coming! Coming there!" Gallagher waited behind the drift for a lull, and then made a plunge around to the other side. Gritting his teeth, he burrowed in toward the place of wailing, and pulled out the wailer, a small dog, with nothing to recommend him but the agony in his eyes. "There, you poor little feller! I'll save you. Stop crying now. You and me is the same breed, I guess. There!" He stuffed the animal under his sweater, bent his head to the wind, and staggered on. Now he was down, and he and his burden were floundering helplessly, almost hopelessly. Now he was up again. His breath came quick and hard, and his lungs felt as though their power was burning to the last flicker. Things began to go black. Then, with a final lurch, and still holding the dog, he fell heavily against the stable door. Curran opened it and pulled him in, picked him up, and sat him on an overturned half-bushel measure against the wall. And while the boy slowly recovered his breath, the man took a good look at the specimen of canine infirmity that Gallagher had dropped on the floor. "Where'd you get it?" "Snowdrift," said Gallagher when he could speak. "What do you call it?" "Dog, I reckon." Pretty bum specimen. Worth saving, do you think? I had to. It yelped. Yes, I suppose so. Just as we preserve idiots and crazy folks because we can't kill 'em. What'll you do with him? Keep him. Think Devon'll let me? I don't know. He doesn't look useful, and you can't call him an ornament. Certainly he was not an ornament, of no race at all. Although with an imagination you might guess that some ancestor at some time had been a fox terrier. He was, or had been at birth, white with black spots on his head and sides. He was so thin that every bone showed, so empty that his ribs almost knocked together. His surface displayed almost every species of eruption and evidence of assault and battery that could be collected together in so small an area. He had them all, from the mange to a broken tooth, the latter evidently the result of an application of boot. Well, now you've got the pretty little thing, what's your next move? First thing, I'll thaw him out. Gallagher dropped on his knees beside the dog and began rubbing the cold stiffened limbs. Here's a horse blanket to lay him on, said Curran, who began to awake to an unusual Good Samaritan feeling. Say, as soon as you've got him so's he can wiggle, I've got some coffee in my tin, and I can heat a bit on the office stove. You keep rubbing. Curran bustled off, and in a minute he was back. Here, you hold his jaws open and I'll pour it down. The dog opened his eyes as the warm liquid went down his throat. That'll surprise his interior, I'm thinking. There, see, he's coming to. What do you think of that? The dog struggled and tried weakly to get on his emaciated legs, cowering at the same time as if he expected a blow. See that now? Said Gallagher. He's been kicked around so much that he doesn't recognize friends when he meets up with them. He's the limit for looks. Here, give him another nip of that, beverage. Do you think Devon'd object if I took him into the office where it's warm? Devon ain't here, and he won't be while this storm lasts, so he won't know. Better thaw him out a bit more first, though. Too hot for a frozen dog in there. Then after a bit, I'll give him a piece of cold mutton I got with my lunch. I brought something, too, from the restaurant, said Gallagher. I guess we can manage to fill him up and keep him. Well, you take the risks yourself. He's your dog. What are you going to call him? A bum-looking beast like that ought to be proud of any old name. I'll just call him that, said Gallagher. Bum. He's a bum-looking dog, and I'm bum myself. Here, you, Bum. You just lay still inside this blanket. I'm going to get the frostbite outen you and some grub into you. And I'd advise, first thing, that you give him a bath and get the mange off him. I've got some soap to do the trick. I'll bring in a pail of water and heat it on the office stove. And we'll roll him up in the blanket till he dries off. A bath'll be the most surprisin' thing yet. Likely the first he ever had. The dog took the rough but kindly treatment in a dazed fashion, not understanding it in the least. But he did come around under it all, and in a vague way began to realize that no harm was intended him. There being no business that day, the two men, after their regular work of tending the horses, spent their spare hours putting heart into this newcomer. He was fed, scrubbed, rubbed down, and dried, while the storm howled in baffled fury outside. By nightfall he was on his legs, following timidly at Gallagher's heels, cringing when spoken to, but sneaking up, in spite of his fear, for the kind touch of this new and extraordinary master. He even managed to coax a bit of wag into that broken tail of his, which never before had had any occasion for such demonstration. That night, after all the stable work was done, and Curran had gone home to his family around the block, Gallagher took Bum with him to the little cubby in the hayloft, and together they lay in mutual warmth and happiness. The derelict man with the hollow chest, and the derelict dog with the grateful heart. And the storm hissed and shrieked under the eaves and around the window casement in vain. Now, whatever Mr. Devon thought when he came in bright and early the next morning, he did not disclose. He only said that, as Curran had, "Where'd you get that?" "In a drift," said Gallagher. Then with a new note in his voice he asked, "Can I keep him?" He's not a beauty, and he won't bring trade. Just now he isn't much of an advertisement for the business. Oh, yes, keep him if you want to, but fatten him up as soon as you can." So Bum became an attaché of the Bergen Street stables. Beautiful he could never be, and never did he lose that habit of cringing when spoken to suddenly. But in spite of it, His confidence in humankind grew apace, and his devotion to Gallagher was almost abject. At his heels he followed from early morn till dewy eve. Gallagher picked a restaurant where dogs were favored, and many a bone came his way from the slipshod waiter. Whatever Gallagher could afford for himself he shared with Bum, not minding that his purchase of warmer clothing had to be put off a little farther. December was a mild month that year, and Gallagher made up for the chilliness of his exterior by the warmth about his heart. He began to whistle about his chores, though now and then he would be interrupted by a fit of coughing. The dog grew in plumpness, if not in grace, but Gallagher himself did not. Christmas Eve and a cold, clear sunset with a rising wind. The people doing their last bits of shopping drew their furs closer as they stepped out into the street and joined the gay, hurrying throng. Mr. Devon, about 8 of the clock, came into the stables for a last look. He glanced at the thermometer that hung outside and saw that it registered 10 below zero and was still falling. Curran and the other men had gone home, and he stopped to glance over his accounts and to smile at the balance to his credit. He smiled again as he looked at an armful of bundles that were to go home with him and be added to the piles under the bulging stockings. Yes, and for the wonderful Christmas tree, waiting in the darkened room, around whose doors 5 merry children had been tiptoeing all day. Christmas was a great institution for the kids, and he and Mother, too, were as excited as the rest when Jenny or Rob laid on their altars some gift of their own contriving. Devon had been prospered this year. Yes, he looked into the glow of the little office stove. Already the red was dying out, and a chill crept through the office walls. The sound of a hollow cough came from the stables without. "Gallagher!" Gallagher came in with Bum at his heels. "It is cold to-night. Be sure to give the horses good, thick beds and blanket them well. Will you be all right yourself?" "Yes, sir. I've plenty of bed covers, and I can get an extra horse blanket if need be." Devon looked sharply at the thin face. "You don't look any too spry. Bum here is growing to be the handsomer man of the two. Aren't you well?" "I'm all right," said Gallagher with a little shrug. "Just a nasty little cough. It's nothing. Next week payday I'll be able—" "See here. Haven't you got warm underwear?" "Haven't needed it. As I say, next week I'll—" Now, I didn't think of that. This Christmas Eve business started me to remember that I haven't paid you very big wages while I was trying you out. Why, yes, a fellow's got to live, and even bones for Bum must cost something. See here, you come up to my house tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and we'll give you a Christmas dinner that'll make your eyeballs jingle. And I've some old underwear you can have. And I'm going to raise your wages. You've done mighty well. Good night and a Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, sir. Mr. Devon, you've been white all through to me, and I'm not forgetting it." All right. You've proved my theory. A man needn't always stay in the gutter because he fell in once, or because he was born there either. I take it you've never had much of a chance." "I was born on the East Side, sir, in New York. I guess I've been pretty tough." Devon pressed the lad's hand and was gone, out into the cold street, whose pavement rang like ice under steel runners. "I haven't done my whole duty by that boy," he said to himself. "He's got no one to look after him, and he needs mothering. Mary'd love to do it, God bless her." The streets rang with happy laughter. How bright the little shops were. Devon swung aboard the crosstown car for Myrtle Avenue, and his mind went back to his armful of bundles and the cheery apartment where his wife and children waited for him. After Devon had gone, Gallagher opened his palm, and stood staring at a crisp $5 bill. Devon certainly was good. The lad, he was only that, had never known anything like this before. And tomorrow there was to be a great dinner, and he was invited. He put the bill carefully away in an old wallet and locked the stable door. Then he saw to it that the horses were well provided for against the growing cold. He shivered as he turned to go upstairs to his loft, and his face was drawn and blue. "I'm lucky to have this place to sleep," he said, "but it's an awful cold night. Bum, you and I got to snuggle up mighty close or we'll get nipped." The night grew colder and colder. Gallagher tried in vain to coax the sluggish blood in his veins to a faster beat. The frost seemed to burrow into him. Blankets or no blankets, he was grateful for the warmth of Bum against his body, but how cold his feet and hands were! Hours went by. The stars burned clear and cold, high above the thin, keen air, but they did not comfort. Sleep did not come to Gallagher. One of the horses grew restless. "Likely his blanket's off. I'll go down and see." Gallagher wrapped the covers around Bum and stole down the stairs. Yes, old Bayberry was uncovered. He fastened the blanket more securely and piled straw deep around the horse's legs. Somehow it seemed less cold here than in the chilly loft. What harm if he sat for a bit on that pile of straw, with the blanket around his shoulders? For a moment, anyhow. So weary he was with the lack of sleep that to climb the stairway just now seemed impossible. Just a minute, and then back to Bum. How queer and dry his lungs felt. His cough racked him, and he lay back exhausted. He was growing sleepy now. The cold did not seem to bite so fiercely. He wrapped the horse blanket tighter around him and nodded. Sleep was coming. How good it was to sleep and not feel the cold. The Christmas bells were ringing now. They made a pretty sound. It was Christmas morning, and at 2 o'clock he was to have a grand dinner. A milk cart went creaking down the street with the driver clapping his arms around him to quicken the circulation. The milk cans clattered, and the frost sang on the tires. Bum stirred in his blankets and nosed around for Gallagher, but he was gone. He listened, no sound. He bounded out and down the stair. Yes, there was Gallagher, his Gallagher. Running to him, he poked his nose into the hand that always caressed him, but Gallagher did not move. The dog licked the white, pinched face upturned on the straw. There was a quiver of the eyelids. "Good old Bum," murmured Gallagher, and then the eyes closed again. The dawn was coming in through the stable windows. It was not usual for Gallagher to be asleep down here, and so fast asleep. It was not all right. Bum must find help. He ran to the office. No one was there. He threw his weight on the street door. It was fastened. Nothing left but to call for help. Bum barked and barked. Then he ran back to Gallagher. He did not stir. Bum returned to the door and sat down, and howled long and impotently. No answer. Again he barked and howled his misery and fear. Raging back and forth, he kept up his desperate appeal. The children in the tenement opposite the stables opened their eyes as the gold began to creep up in the east. "Merry Christmas!" they shouted. "Let's look in our stockings. My, but it's cold! There's a dog barking somewhere. I bet he's shiverin'." The elders stirred in their warm beds. "I wonder what's the matter with that bothersome dog. He's spoiled my nap." "Merry Christmas!" shouted the children. Sure enough, and the flapjacks must be baked. Mrs. Kittery shivered and began to dress hurriedly. Still the barking and howling were more frantic and insistent. "Where is the brute of a dog?" said Pat Kittery. "Sounds as if he was over in Devon's stables." "I believe something's wrong," said Mrs. Kittery from the kitchen, where she was mixing the batter. "Why don't you go over and see? That Gallagher stays there nights." Kittery put his nose out the window. "Brrr!" he said, and put on his overcoat and cap. He went down the stair, crossed the street, and knocked on the stable door. The barking and howling became more frantic than ever. "What's the matter in there?" "Ooh, ooh, ooh, ooh!" wailed Bum. "The door is locked. I'll have to go around the back and get Carolin." "Wait here, you. I'm coming back." Carolin and Kittery entered the stables, and a little half-crazed dog jumped on them and then darted away toward the corner of the stable. The men did not follow immediately. He ran back, renewed his pleading, and was gone again. And then they followed him. When they reached the pile of straw, Bum was crouched on Gallagher's chest, moaning and licking the cold cheek. Curran stopped and placed his ear close to the white face. "There's life there yet. We'll bring him around. Bum, you saved your pal. He'd have been gone soon. We ain't been as decent as you, or he'd have been better fitted to be here this cold night. I'll telephone Devon." When Mr. Devon came, Gallagher was just able to smile weakly, despite the pain in his chilled limbs. "We are going to fix you up all right, boy, and then for a Merry Christmas dinner, and a few other changes. Bum, you go to the party too, and you deserve the best bit of breast on the turkey." "Good old Bum," said Gallagher. End of section 7. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America.